Hey guys, tonight we step into a dimly lit Viking longhouse. As dawn's first pale light peeks through narrow windows, painting rough-hewn beams in soft amber tones, and if you trip over a stray drinking horn, you probably won't survive this clumsy debut, so mind your step. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And drop your location and local time in the comments so we can see where you're tuning in from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge across the earthen floor, the scent of smoldering peat mingling with cold morning air as shield maidens fearsome in battle, gentle in ritual assemble around a long oak table. Their braided hair still faintly frosted, they place honey jars, carved wooden ladles, and curving mead horns in careful order. A mainstream historical fact: Viking-age communities often brewed mead at home, using communal longhouses as production centers, where families and warriors alike contributed labor and drink in equal measure. Historians still argue whether large-scale production occurred in coastal towns or remained chiefly a domestic craft among devoted households. Fringe tidbit surfaces: some sagas claim shield maidens whispered runes into honey jars before brewing to imbue the mead with battlefield courage. Historians still debate whether such rune inscriptions survived cultic practice or appear only as poetic embellishment in later manuscripts. The shield maidens exchange knowing glances and murmured giggles as if sharing an inside joke older than the fjords themselves. You groan inwardly. If honey could sweet-talk my critics, I'd bribe them with barrels. That's your first light jest. At one end of the table, Ingrid, the group's eldest and fiercest, lays out iron brewing tools, a bent poker for churning mash, a bronze ladle for transferring liquid, and a small cauldron for heating water. You notice a carved ram's head on the ladle handle, its eyes worn smooth by centuries of use. A mainstream fact: Viking brewers prized metal utensils for durability and believed iron, stirred into mead, could ward off evil spirits. Some accounts note iron nails were even boiled in the brew for extra potency. Historians still argue whether iron's inclusion affected flavor or served purely symbolic functions. Nearby, Freydis, the youngest, uncorks a large clay jar of honey, harvested only last moon's full phase. She whisks a small wick, dipped in tallow, past the jar's rim, igniting a brief flame before snuffing it out. A friend's rumor insists this flame-seared lid is sealed in protective spirits, keeping the honey pure through winter storm. Historians still debate whether flame capping represented genuine antiseptic knowledge or simply dramatic flair to amuse guests. You snort quietly. If candlelight sealed my mistakes, I'd light my life with torches. That's your second gentle joke. You observe the shield maiden's careful choreography. One unrolls a strip of parchment bearing the brewing recipe, ink faded, but legible listing ratios of honey to water and stirring times to honor Odin's counsel. They nod at each step, consulting memories and sharing lore. A mainstream fact: recipes were rarely written down in Viking society. Oral transmission dominated, yet a few rune-inscribed slates have survived, hinting at domestic brewing instructions. Historians still debate whether textual records emerged mainly from Christian scribes recording pagan practices or represented authentic Viking documentation. The fire pit crackles beside you. Small logs, spilling sparks that drift upward like fireflies. You lean in, inhaling smoke's earthy sweetness as water simmers in a blackened kettle. A fringe suggestion: some alchemists claim that adding juniper berries to the water created a shield maiden's brew, granting clarity of mind. Historians still argue whether juniper featured in authentic mead recipes or if it crept in during later Scandinavian botanical innovations. You watch beads of condensation dance on the kettle side and joke under your breath. If steam cleared my sinuses this well, I'd build a sauna instead of a shower. That's your third light jest. The Shieldmaidens fall silent as the first spark of sunlight slashes through the smoky air, illuminating floating motes like tiny embers frozen in midair. You feel the hush wrap around you, a moment suspended between darkness and day, a threshold where mundane chores transform into sacred rites. Subtle callback surfaces remember that rune-inscribed honey jar. Now it glows in dawn's beam, its ram's head seeming to wink at you with timeless mischief. Ingrid dips her bronze ladle into the honey jar, scooping a thick ribbon that drips slowly back into the vessel. She turns the ladle to the rising light, letting honey refract into a golden ray. A mainstream fact: Viking mead brewers often tasted raw honey before mixing to judge its floral nuance, cherry heather or wildflower aiming for flavor balance. Historians still argue whether such terroir-led brewing matched later continental apothecary precision or relied solely on experienced palates. You step forward eager to help and slip slightly on damp straw underfoot. The room stifles a collective laugh. No one mocks, but you catch Freydis's amused smirk before it vanishes. A soft quip escapes: if I could slip this gracefully into every meeting, I'd be the office legend. That's your fourth gentle jest. The longhouse's walls, lined with shields and hunting trophies, absorb each sound. Dripping honey, crackling hearth, whispered instructions. The Shieldmaidens move as one, their breath a measured cadence as they align jars and ladles. You feel part of a living tapestry, threads of honey and hearth, weaving into the dawn's soft glow. Without a word, Ingrid raises her ladle, signaling the ceremonial first pour. You hold your breath as she drizzles honey into the cauldron, each drop plopping gently into simmering water, sending ripples that catch light like liquid gold. A mainstream fact: adding honey slowly prevented scorching and preserved delicate enzymes. Some sources note Viking brewers watched for color change and aroma as key fermentation cues. Historians still debate whether any chemical understanding informed these practices or if they emerged purely from trial and error. As the honey melts with water, a fragrance heady, sweet, and earthy unfurls through the longhouse, stirring hidden memories of summer meadows and wildflower clusters. You close your eyes, letting the scent cradle you like a lullaby sung by the land itself. The Shieldmaidens begin to stir the must in unison, each ladle stroke synchronized, a silent vow of unity and purpose. You step back, watching the amber swirl deepen, reflecting every pair of determined eyes. At that moment, you realize this is more than brewing. It's an act of devotion, a reminder that even the fiercest Shieldmaiden needs sweetness to temper her strength. A gentle thought drifts: if life had this stirring pace, I'd never rush. And as dawn's glow warms the longhouse, you know this slow brewed ritual will carry you forward into tomorrow's tale. You trudge out of the longhouse into a damp, pre-dawn mist, the earth beneath your boots soft with overnight rain. Heather blooms sway gently in the twilight breeze, their purple petals bending like bowed heads awaiting tribute. In the distance, sheer cliffs cradle hidden beehives, carved into rocky ledges, home to wild Norse honeybees whose golden bounty fuels Mead's beginning. A mainstream historical fact: Viking communities harvested honey from wild hives using smoke to calm bees, a practice noted by medieval chroniclers who described care and patience in gathering nature's sweet store. Historians still argue whether hives were tended communally by entire villages or claimed by powerful chieftains as tribute. You kneel on dew-slick grass, breathing in the sharp, earthy scent of damp heather. As you prepare a bundle of birch twigs for smoke, the twigs crackle as you light them, wisps of white smoke curling upward in lacy tendrils. A fringe tidbit surfaces: some Norse legends insist that smoke scented with juniper bled dreams of ancestral guidance into the honeybees, making their honey vision sweet. Historians still debate whether any ritual smoke additions persisted beyond poetic myth or influenced taste subtly. You can smoke toward the cliff face, watching your breath become visible in the chilled air and thinking, if smoke cleared my inbox this efficiently, I'd set my laptop ablaze. That's your first light jest. As the smoke drifts against mossy stone, you hear the low hum of activity. Shrouded hives release citizens into the chilled morning air, their wings flickering like quicksilver in dim light. You step closer, gingerly placing a bent, wooden shield beneath each hive to catch dripping honey and comb fragments. A mainstream fact: Viking honey harvesting often involved tilting shields or wooden troughs to collect excess honey before cutting comb. Villagers prized comb fragments for direct consumption. Historians still argue whether honeycomb removal risked hive collapse or if bees rebounded quickly enough to sustain future harvests. You squint upward, peering at the narrow fissures where hives cling. Ingrid and Freydis, cloaked in woolen mantles, brace themselves with rope ladders slung over rock outcrops. Their leather gloves grip rough stone. As they ascend, each movement is cautious, yet confident. A fringe rumor drifts. Local storytellers claim Shieldmaidens sang low hymns as they climbed, believing their voices lulled bees into reverence and prevented stings. Historians still debate whether such hymnic rituals were practical or survived as romantic embellishments in later sagas. You swallow picturing song weaving through the mist and quip under your breath, if lullabies soothe my stress. This well I'd sing in every Zoom call. That's your second gentle jest. At a particularly high ledge, Freydis taps the hive's upper edge with a slender iron rod, sending soft vibrations through honeycomb chambers. You watch as calm bees retreat deeper, clustering around queen cells. A mainstream historical fact: vibration techniques helped harvesters minimize defensive aggression, a method mirrored in later apicultural practices. Historians still argue whether Norse harvesters pioneered such methods independently or learned from earlier Celtic beekeepers. You breathe in the faint sweetness carried by the wind and think, if my morning routine vibrated this gently, I wouldn't need coffee. You reach into your satchel for a small wooden mallet and a thin knife. Below, Ingrid lowers a shield into position, and with precise taps and slices, you release a fresh chunk of the comb. Honey drips like liquid sunlight onto oak wood, the amber gleam captivating your gaze. A fringe detail floats. Some archives allege that Shieldmaidens reserved honeycomb from the first harvest for oath-swearing ceremonies, believing its purity sealed promises. Historians still debate whether any such honey oath rituals occurred, or if they appear only in poetic sources. You taste a small dip of raw honeycomb, its waxy chew yielding sweet rush that slides warm down your throat. You quip quietly, if promises tasted this sweet, I'd swear by honey in every contract. That's your third gentle jest. Behind you, the heathland stretches in rolling waves, the heather's purple haze fading into green fields, dotted with grazing sheep. A gentle drizzle begins each droplet, catching honey's aroma as it lands on open palms. You kneel to cup rainwater, letting it mingle with honey on your tongue, a raw, unfiltered taste of land rain and bees devotion. A mainstream fact, some Norse sources describe rinsing comb under the rain to remove loose bees before cutting. Historians still argue whether brainwashing improved honey purity or risked dilution and waste. You savor the rain-honey fusion thinking, if rain could sweeten my mornings, I'd live outdoors. Below the hive's bulging sacks, stand ready to transport this dust harvest back to the longhouse. The Shieldmaidens descend, balancing honey-laden shields against their hips. You help steady the sacks, each one heavy with the comb and dripping excess honey. The smell grows richer, an intoxicating breeze, promising warmth and celebration. A fringe note emerges. Some local women swore that honey harvested in pre-dawn hours held stronger healing properties, a belief still debated among herbalists and scholars. You tie sacks shut with braided cord and rise, brushing grass off your knees. As clouds part to unveil pale morning light, together you trudge back across heather fields, boots sinking into the soft earth, honey sloshing gently in sacks. The world feels sacred, each step echoing the ancient footsteps of forebears who revered bees as divine emissaries. You glance at Ingrid's steadfast silhouette, her cloak streaked with honey-smudged stone, and realize this harvest binds past to present, warrior to brewer. As the longhouse roof emerges beyond hills, you breathe deeply, lungs filled with peat smoke, heather blossom and raw honey's promise. You quip softly, if home smelled like this, I'd never leave the porch. That's your fourth gentle jest. The Shieldmaidens pause at the threshold, positioning sacks before a low stone hearth. Fragments of comb glisten across shields and kneeling wooden buckets. A mainstream historical fact, after harvest honeycomb and dripping honey were immediately transferred to cold cellars to prevent fermentation. Historians still argue whether cellars were temperature controlled or relied on winter's chill. You help unload the sacks, each movement guided by dawn's unfolding light and communal care. Framed by the longhouse's timber portals, you sense how this wild honey harvest, heather fields, cliffside hives, ritual smoke, forms the first sacred step in Mead's creation. A gentle callback surfaces, remember the rune-inscribed jar. Now it's ready to cradle today's harvest, weaving myth and honey into one amber vessel. With that, you follow Shieldmaidens inside, carrying raw sacred harvest forward into fermentation's next chapter. You slip out the back door of the longhouse into a small woodland grove, where a clear spring bubbles up from mossy stones, its water colder than morning steel. You trudge across damp leaves, the sharp scent of pine mixing with peat as you approach the pool's edge. Shieldmaidens kneel in a loose semicircle, each holding a carved wooden bowl. A mainstream historical fact. Viking brewers prized spring water over river water, believing fresh mountain or forest springs provided fewer impurities and better fermentation. Some sagas note that royal breweries fenced off springs to guarantee pure supply. Historians still argue whether this preference arose from empirical taste testing or from later Christian chroniclers romanticizing nature's purity. Ingrid dips her bowl into the bubbling pool, letting the water swirl around her fingers before lifting it clear. Tiny fishtails dart beneath the surface, and you catch a glimpse of smooth pebbles, worn like ancient rune stones. A fringe ritual whispers through your mind. Some Shieldmaidens believed that leaping salmon, sprinkles upon water, would bless mead with fertility for herds. Historians still debate whether any genuine fish sacrifice customs featured in mead making or lingered as poetic metaphor. You hold the bowl, watching sunlight dance through ripples and quip, if fish could bless my morning coffee, I'd swim upstream daily. That's your first gentle jest. Next, Freydis reaches into her satchel for a length of braided leather cord. She ties small bundles of wild-thyme peppermint and bog myrtle to the cord, then dips the bundle into the spring. The herbs hiss as cold water teases aromatic oils. A mainstream historical fact: Viking brewers sometimes macerated cleansing herbs in spring water to reduce musty flavors and impart gentle herbal notes, much as medieval apothecaries infused waters with aromatic plants. Historians still debate whether these herbal rinses served primarily flavoring functions or operated as antimicrobial measures recognized in folk medicine. You inhale the water's new perfume, minty, earthy, slightly peppery, and think, if mint water cured my writer's block, I'd spritz it like perfume. That's your second light joke. Nearby, you note a carved stone altar beside the spring its surface, worn smooth by centuries of bowls and hands. Ingrid scoops water from the bowl, then pours a thin stream over the altar's heart-shaped indentation, chanting a soft invocation to Freyr. Blessed be these waters clad in earth's embrace. A fringed tidbit drifts some clans believed offering water back to the spring ensured reciprocity. Harvested water returned a portion of its life force to the source. Historians still argue whether any written records confirm such libations, or if they appear solely in oral traditions. You trace a finger around the indentation and quip, if my inbox could receive something gentle in return, I'd send water daily. That's your third gentle jest. A hush falls as each shield maiden approaches the altar, dipping her bowl, touching her lips, and then splashing water onto her brow in a silent bow. The cool liquid beads on their skin glint like dew-cradled gemstones. A mainstream fact ritual purification before brewing signified respect and ceremony echoing broader Norse customs of ablution before sacred deeds. Historians still debate how widespread such rites were outside elite circles or confined to warrior brewers. You watch droplets trickle down braided hair, feeling the groove of ritual through ages. At Ingrid's nod, the women form a chain, each passing bowls in turn, so every mead vessel will receive blessed water. You join the line, cradling a bowl, feeling the smooth wood warmed slightly by hands before yours. The grove's air hums with quiet intention, the repetitive motion, meditative as the water glides from bowl to bowl. A fringe notion surfaces. Some whisper that water blessed with communal touch carried not only purity, but the collective will to protect the brew from spoilage. Historians still argue whether this notion influenced actual brewing outcomes or remained symbolic. You shift your weight water sloshing in the bowl and think, if teamwork refilled my motivation this well, I'd crowdsource daily. That's your fourth gentle jest. Finally, the last bowls empty into a large oak vat, perched on stone supports. The vat's interior gleams with water ready to meld with honey and grain. Ingrid stands voice low. Now our mead's base is ready pure as Friar's gift. A mainstream historical fact, many Viking brewers stored spring water in wooden or stone vessels, shaded by trees, to maintain a cool temperature crucial before fermentation began. Historians still debate whether any temperature moderation techniques like burying vats were employed or if spring shade sufficed. You step back to admire the vat, a silent promise of life and liquor to come. As you take one final sip from your bowl before discarding it into the vat, the water tastes of earth and stone, with a faint herbal echo. The grove seems to hold its breath as though acknowledging its part in crafting mead's future sweetness. You raise a small brow and quip, if every problem tasted like this water, I'd swallow my pride daily. That's your fifth gentle jest. The shield maidens stand in a circle around the filled vat, the bowls, now resting at their feet like offering plates. Through the mingled scents of pine mint, bog myrtle, and fresh spring water, you sense the sacred alchemy beginning. Water's purity meeting honey's richness. A callback shimmers, remember the heated stones to come. Soon they'll warm this blessed water-honey blend for fermentation's next stage. You inhale the grove's scent deeply, letting the ritual stillness cradle you before forging ahead. You slip back into the longhouse's hearthroom as the flickering embers cast dancing shadows across rough-hewn beams. The air smells of smoke and crisp barley husk as apprentices gather handfuls of malted grains in woven baskets. A mainstream historical fact Viking brewers use: malted barley grain germinated, then dried to convert starches into fermentable sugars. An early example of cereal biochemistry, recognized by Norse households. Historians still argue whether malting techniques spread from Roman contact or developed independently in northern climates. Ingrid kneels by a low stone shelf, laden with barley clusters, each grain sprouting tiny white shoots. She pinches one kernel, testing its pliability, before passing the basket to you. The kernels feel firm, yet springy, proof that germination succeeded. A fringe tidbit surfaces local lore, claims Shieldmaidens whispered heartbeats to the grains during malting, believing rhythmic pulses harmonized enzyme activity. Historians still debate whether any such rituals influenced fermentation or remained a poetic tradition. You quip, if grains hum like this for my deadlines, I'd tap dance through meetings. That's your first light jest. Nearby, a small wooden kiln stands before the hearth, its interior lined with coiled birch branches that will fuel the drying fire. Fridas adjusts a crude damper, coaching apprentices to stoke embers, just enough to darken barley without burning the sprouts. A mainstream fact, Viking malt kilns used indirect heat and gentle airflow to preserve enzyme potency. Historians still argue whether any kilns featured chimney flues or relied solely on roof smoke vents. You step forward, feeding a thin birch medallion into the flame, watching sparks drift upward like glowing fireflies. As the fire warms the kiln's interior, apprentices spread soaked barley across a slatted wooden tray, handing it to Ingrid for loading. You help carry the tray, steam rising in swirling wisps as cool morning air meets heat. A fringe whisper drifts. Some accounts state that adding a sprig of heather to the kiln imparted floral notes to malt, a practice historians still debate as either early flavor innovation or accidental ash contamination. You inhale the toasty scent, rich with grain and faint pine, then joke, if my breakfast smelled this good, I'd skip the toaster. That's your second gentle jest. Inside the kiln, barley kernels shift and crackle softly as moisture escapes. Freydis leans in, feeling the heat's gradient with her palm pressed to the side, guiding apprentices to rotate trays for even drying. A mainstream fact, rotating malt trays ensured uniform dryness and prevented mold. Historians still argue whether Viking brewers tracked drying times by sun position or relied on tactile testing alone. You lean close enough to hear grains pop quietly like tiny secrets and quip, if feedback snapped this gently, I'd handle criticism smoothly. That's your third light jest. You step aside to refill birch branches in the kiln's firebox, each log's bark flaking into glowing embers. You pause to admire the grain's transformation. Pale kernels, turning golden, then bronze, each hue a milestone towards sweet fermentables. A fringe rumor surfaces. Some said that overheated malt yielded smoke brew destined for warriors' midnight toasts, though historians still debate whether this equates to actual smoked beers or later poetic license. You brush ash from your sleeve and muse. If my project smelled like smoky barley, teammates would toast me nightly. That's your fourth gentle jest. As trays darken into rich brown clusters, Ingrid signals completion. Apprentices carry trays out into the open longhouse air to cool the eruption of steam swirling upward. A mainstream fact rapid cooling prevented over-roasting and preserved malt enzymes. Historians still debate whether some brewers used pond water douses or simply relied on ambient air. You help carry trays through the doorway the longhouse's shadows, giving way to pale dawn light. The cooled malt piles in woven baskets near the brewing tun, ready for crushing. You pause, cupping a handful. Its texture crisp, grainy, and slightly sweet. A callback surfaces remember that honeycomb you harvested. Soon it will join this malted barley, creating the mead's balanced body. You close your fingers over the crisp, malt feeling future sweetness nestled in grains. A final thought drifts. If life's lessons were this toasty and golden, I'd savor each step. As the longhouse fills with barley's earthy aroma, you follow Shieldmaidens onward, carrying malt's promise into the next sacred stage of mead's creation. You stand before a towering oak tun, its staves bound by iron hoops, the wood darkened by seasons of ferment. Apprentices place the freshly crushed malt at the bottom, each handful cascading like golden pebbles. A mainstream historical fact: Viking brewers used oak or pine tuns, favoring sturdy timber that imparted subtle tannins and held cool for slow mixing. Historians still argue whether pine's resinous notes ever dominated early meads or oak remained the gold standard. Ingrid ladles in cool spring water until the malt rises in a submerged mound, then scoops thick honey from a rune-inscribed jar, its surface gleaming like the liquid sun. The mixture called musk swirls amber and grainy beneath her spoon. A fringe tidbit surfaces. Some Shieldmaidens claim that stirring must clockwise draw good luck, counterclockwise invited turbulence. Historians still debate whether these directional customs influenced flavor or persisted as playful superstition. You lean in, inhaling the sweet steam rising in scented plumes and quip, "If luck stirred my coffee this gently, I'd pour by moonlight." That's your first gentle jest. Freydis steps forward with carved wooden measure, a ladle calibrated in horn drams, pouring honey and water in an exact 1:4 ratio, above visible malt. A mainstream historical fact ratio, precision, helped balance fermentable sugars and prevent overly cloying meads. Some saga fragments note, families guarded their drams, measures like heirlooms. Historians still argue whether everyday brewers achieved consistent ratios or relied on taste and experience alone. You watch the must's layers settle, then slowly bleed into uniform amber and think, if my schedule blended this smoothly, I'd never miss a deadline. That's your second light jest. Next, Ingrid adds crushed juniper berries and foraged meadowsweet, small bowls of wood gifts resting at her elbow. Each pinch drops into the tune with a soft echo. A mainstream fact: Viking meads often included local botanicals for flavor and medicinal benefit. Common herbs like meadowsweet added tannins and gentle salicylates. Historians still argue whether Shieldmaidens selected herbs by trial or followed passed-down lists. You sniff the botanicals' mingled aroma, pine, honey, meadow breeze, and quip, "If my perfume smelled this adventurous, I'd wear it daily." That's your third gentle jest. With a broad oaken paddle, you and Ingrid begin the first vigorous stir, pushing must around the tun's circumference, scraping sweet grain from staves. The paddle's surface creaks as sticky droplets fly in slow arcs, dissolving back into the blend. A fringe whisper drifts, some said, paddle carvings, rune symbols etched along the handle, channeled protective spells into each stir, though historians still debate whether runic paddles existed or appear only in saga embellishments. You dig in elbow deep, feeling the must's heft and joke. If chores mix this satisfyingly, I'd volunteer for housework. That's your fourth light jest. You step back to let apprentices add water to maintain level, observing how foam forms at the surface. Frothy bubbles bursting like stardust in amber seas. A mainstream fact, foam management prevented overflow and trapped unwanted proteins. Brewers often skimmed excess foam with a wooden ladle. Historians still argue whether scum removal improved clarity or mainly satisfied aesthetics. You lean in, brushing foam aside as if unveiling hidden treasure, and think, if problems foamed up this predictably, I'd skim them off life's surface. That's your fifth gentle jest. The Shieldmaidens form a circle around the tun, each placing a hand on the rim in quiet blessing. The must, heavy with honey and herbs, awaits yeast's whisper to life. You sense the collective pulse, hands, blades, drums, all working toward creation. A callback emerges: earlier spring, water, maltings, golden grain, wild honey. Now they unite into must's rich promise. The longhouse hums with expectation as the first prayers for fermentation rise softly, and you step back anticipating the next sacred step, yeast's arrival. You gather just outside the longhouse, where the scent of must still cling to the air. A low wooden shelf runs along the outer wall, its surface lined with hollowed birch bark cups and earthenware bowls. These vessels hold yesterday's brewhouse remnants, the precious dregs teeming with wild yeast. A mainstream historical fact, Viking brewers often preserved a portion of each batch's sediment as the inoculum for the next brew, a practice akin to modern sourdough starters, ensuring consistent fermentation. Historians still argue whether this brewing backstop method spread through Norse networks or emerged independently in scattered households. Ingrid kneels by the row of cups, lifting one filled with viscous sediment. She invites you to peer inside, pale, frothy layer crowns, darker residues of honey and malt alive, with unseen cells ready to feast. A fringe tidbit surfaces: some Shieldmaidens whispered spells over the dregs to encourage gentle spirits in the yeast, though historians still debate whether such invocations influenced fermentation or existed only as poetic flourish. You inhale the musty, yeasty aroma, earthy, sweet, and tangy, then quip, if my sourdough smelled this promising, I'd never buy bread. That's your first gentle jest. Fridas uncorks a fresh bud of birch bark harvested weeks ago and cured slowly over peat smoke, and dips its end into the sediment, swirling to capture a sticky glob of yeast-laden slurry. She strokes a rune-etched pattern on the bark handle before drawing it back as if sealing intent into the living culture. A mainstream historical fact, birch bark's natural oils provided slight antimicrobial properties, helping select yeast strains and inhibit unwanted bacteria. Some accounts note bark-lined vats produced cleaner ferments. Historians still argue whether brewers recognize these properties empirically or if they favored bark for its availability and durability. You let the bark's tip brush your palm, feeling a tingle of life beneath your fingers. As each Shieldmaiden draws yeast into her vessel, they murmur quiet affirmations: "Moder be with you, ancient daughters of honey," invoking Meadrix, an informal brewer's patroness in local lore. A fringe notion drifted. Meadrix's name appears only in late folkloric accounts, leaving historians to debate whether any goddess cult centered on yeast existed or if Medrix arose from later brewing fraternities. You feel the group's reverence for these tiny creatures more potent than any blade. Now it's your turn. You dip a carved wooden whisk, its tines slender as antlers, into the sediment and lift a plume of creamy slurry. The whisk drips slowly, each bead falling into a waiting oak tun filled with must. A mainstream fact, careful whisking aerated early must-supporting yeast activation. Viking brewers sometimes used feather quills or wooden whisks for this purpose. Historians still debate whether aeration was deliberate or simply a byproduct of yeast addition. You swirl the whisk gently, watching bubbles gather at the surface. Then set it aside. Ingrid steps forward with a shallow clay bowl containing fresh birch sap, drawn from living trees, and poured through linen strainers to remove grit. She pours a small stream over the yeast slurry, nourishing the culture with sugars and minerals. A fringe, whisper surfaces sap's native yeasts, could augment wild strains, though scholars still argue whether brewers valued sap for microbial boost or if its addition served symbolic ties to forest spirits. You taste a drop of sap, sweet, subtly earthy, and joke, "If birch sap fueled my energy, I'd tap every tree in town." That's your second light jest. Each shield maiden places her yeast vessel atop a low stone shelf near the hearth, where ambient warmth from the fire encourages gentle yeast replication overnight. A mainstream fact, yeast propagation benefited from stable moderate temperatures. Vikings often placed cultures near a hearth that stayed around 20-25 degrees. Historians still argue whether any brewers measured heat or relied entirely on proximity. You tuck a hand near the hearth's glow, feeling heat kissing your fingertips as you imagine microscopic armies of yeast multiplying in silent industry. Ingrid joins the group, hands folded in quiet respect. "Tomorrow our must will breathe life and transform," she intones. You inhale the mingled scents, honey malt, smoke sap, and sense anticipation, weaving through the longhouse. A callback emerges, remember when you place staves. An added must. Now yeast will claim its throne unseen, yet potent. You smile at the thought that these tiny cells hold the key to sweet amber mead, and you quip, "If tiny team players drove my projects, I'd celebrate every grain." That's your third gentle jest. As dusk's last embers fade, you step back inside the yeast vessels, glowing softly in lamplight. You leave them to rest, knowing tomorrow's chorus of fermentation will fill the longhouse with the first hum of rising mead. You slip into the brewing chamber at dawn's second light, where heavy oak walls trap a gentle warmth, and the tun's surface ripples with nascent bubbles. Shield maidens form a circle around the tun faces illuminated by lanterns, swaying in the cool air. Ingrid raises her voice in a melodic chant invoking Freya's name. "Hail, Lady of Sweet Mead, bless this brewing heart." A mainstream historical fact, Norse, poetic and ritual chants frequently accompanied critical craft moments. Skaldic verses once documented at ship launchings and feasts. Historians still argue whether such poems served practical coordination or existed chiefly as a ceremonial theater. Freydis steps forward holding a bowl of wildflower petals, heather, blackberry blossom, and elderflower, gently sprinkling them into the foamy crest. Each petal drifts inward, carried by rising vapor, releasing bright floral notes. A fringe tidbit surfaces some brewers swore that petals from plants gathered at moonrise enhance fermentation depth, though scholars still debate whether moonlit harvest rituals impacted yeast behavior or if petal additions simply flavored mead. You lean in, inhaling the blooming aroma, and murmur, "If flowers calmed my deadlines this effectively, I'd keep bouquets on speed dial." That's your first gentle jest. Next, Ingrid dips a small iron nail in salt water and lightly taps the tun's rim, sending a resonant chime that ripples through the brewing room. Apprentices pause, heads bowed for a beat's respectful hush. A mainstream historical fact, metal rituals tapping or embedding iron appear in medieval brewing texts as pest control and symbolic purification. Historians still argue whether iron sonic waves had perceived protective power or remained symbolic gestures. You feel the sound's vibration in your chest, steady and grounding, and quip, "If chimes fix my focus, I'd hang them by my desk." That's your second light jest. Then Ingrid pours a dribble of last season's mead, honey soft and gently effervescent, into the tun, ceremonially bridging past and present batches. The amber fluid merges currents, swirling in sisterhood. A mainstream fact using a mother from previous fermentations ensured yeast, continuity, and flavor consistency. Historians still debate how early brewers recognized and controlled this mother culture. You watch the two layers unite and think, if experience merged so seamlessly, I tap into my past daily. Freydis lifts a carved wooden horn filled with fresh spring water, circling the tun's rim thrice before pouring in a steady stream. The water seals blessings, diluting must's initial sweetness for balanced fermentation. A fringe belief drifts. Some traditions claimed 3 circuits represented the unity of earth, sea, and sky. Historians still debate whether such triads held genuine cosmological meaning or emerged as later symbolic interpretations. You feel the ritual's rhythm resonate and joke. If I had 3 circuits of productivity, I'd never miss a workout. As the final drop of water falls, Ingrid sprinkles a pinch of ground bog myrtle onto the surface, the green dust settling like confetti. A mainstream fact, bog myrtle, known for antiseptic properties, featured in Viking brewing to inhibit unwanted bacteria. Historians still argue whether its use spread through monastic influences or evolved locally. You sniff the herbal note, mingling with honey and grain, and quip, "If herbs sharpen my wit this well, I'd garnish every thought." The Shieldmaidens join hands encircling the tun. Their collective breath rises in a soft exhale that rouses the yeast's gentle stirring. You feel a communal pulse, each heart aligned in quiet purpose. A callback emerges from honey harvest's cliffside heights to must's hopeful stir, now united in this blessing. The chamber's hush holds sacred promise, fermentation's first breath ordained by song metal and memory. You step back, letting the Shieldmaiden's chant fade into the longhouse's warmth. The tun's surface shivers with tiny bubbles, an unseen chorus of yeast at work. You smile, feeling humbled by unseen forces, shaping tomorrow's sweetness. A final thought drifts. If blessings bubbled like this, I'd chant over every cup of coffee. And as you leave the chamber, that soft echo of ritual carries you forward into fermentation's deep hush. You step into the stone-lined curing room, where shadows flicker against cool walls carrying stacked hot stones from last night's hearth. Apprentices carry the smooth river rocks in woven birch baskets, still warm to the touch, and position them around the tun's base. A mainstream historical fact, Vikings often used heated stones, placed in or around fermenting vessels to maintain steady warm temperatures, an improvisation predating metal stoves. Historians still argue whether stone temperature gauges relied on master brewer instincts or oral guidelines passed through clans. Freydis kneels beside the tun, selecting a fist-sized stone from the basket. She tests its heat by hovering it near her wrist. When it feels comfortably warm about body temperature, she slips it gently into the must. Tiny bubbles spurt around the rock's edge as it sinks, releasing stored warmth and stirring the brew. A fringe tidbit surfaces. Some sagas claim Shieldmaidens spoke the stone's name aloud, Elderstein or Firestone, believing each carried its own spirit to encourage lively fermentation. Historians still debate whether any named stones existed or if the notion emerged as poetic flourish. You lean in, feeling ripples of warmth radiate through the must and quip. If a warm rock soothed my cold mornings, I'd keep a hot pebble in my pocket. That's your first gentle jest. Ingrid adds a second stone, larger and darker, hefted with both hands. She murmurs a rune for consistency beneath her breath as she lowers it with a hooked paddle, coaxing it to avoid splashing. A mainstream fact rune inscriptions on tools and stones served not only decorative but mnemonic functions, reminding brewers of temperature timing. Historians still argue whether rune-marked stones were commonplace or reserved for ceremonial batches. You watch the stones slow descend and think, if runes guided my cooking, I'd never burn toast. That's your second light joke. The heated stones cradle the must in gentle warmth, maintaining around 20-24 degrees, ideal for yeast activity. Apprentices monitor the stones, rotating them every half hour to distribute heat evenly, drawing cool stones to the basket for reheating. A mainstream historical fact, regular stone rotation prevented hot spots and ensured steady fermentation. Historians still debate whether any households time rotations by sundial or by listening to bubbling intensity. You notice the must's surface shimmer with uniform ripples, a sign of thriving yeast and joke. If my mood rings showed emotion, this clearly I'd wear one daily. That's your third gentle jest. Nearby, a small pen of smoke-filled air drifts from the hearth, where stones cool before reuse. The smoke-dried juniper and birch lingers, imparting faint, resinous notes to the room. A fringe rumor drifts, some brewers swore. Cooled stones retained residual smoke that seasoned future batches, though historians still debate whether smoke seasoning influenced mead flavor or merely freshened stones. You inhale the smoky tang, savoring its mix with honey sweetness, and think, if my laundry smelled like this, I'd skip fabric softener. That's your fourth gentle jest. As each hot stone emerges, apprentices place it on a low stone shelf to rest before the next cycle. You help remove a particularly large stone, its surface crackling as trapped moisture escapes, tiny spouts of steam, marking its edges like ethereal beacons. A mainstream fact, cracked stones sometimes shattered from thermal shock, prompting brewers to select river-worn rocks free of internal fissures. Historians still argue whether brewers tested stones for flaws or learned by trial and error. You balance the stone on a woven mat, marveling at its heat-retaining heft, and quip, if my heart could hold warmth like this stone, I'd never feel cold. That's your fifth gentle jest. Ingrid steps back to observe the ton. She dips a slender wooden dowel into the must to gauge temperature, then wipes it on her sleeve. The must clings warmly, indicating ideal warmth for fermentation. A fringe observation surfaces some early apothecaries use herbal thermometry, placing leaf sprigs into the brew, and judging temperature by leaf wilting. Historians still debate whether Viking brewers embraced such plant tests or deemed them too unreliable. You lean forward, tracing bubbles rising around the stone's curve, and think, if plants proofread my emails, I'd compose in petals. That's your sixth light jest. Through the low window, dawn's light seeps in, painting the must's golden surface in soft hues. You feel part of a living continuum, stones from heart to tune, ancient practice to present ritual. A callback emerges, remember that ritual blessing around the ton. Now physical elements, stones, flames, smoke, merge to steady the unseen yeast's dance. You exhale, letting the room's warmth cradle you before moving on, knowing fermentation's next chapter awaits, as must transforms into mead's slow, sweet heartbeat. You slip into the clarification chamber, where oak racks line the cool stone floor, and low wooden troughs stand ready to receive sweet liquid. Shieldmaidens carry ladles and cloth strainers, each tool polished smooth by countless brews. A mainstream historical fact, racking transferring mead from one vessel to another while leaving sediment behind was practiced by Viking brewers to improve clarity and flavor. Historians still argue whether racking occurred only once or in multiple stages across batches. At the first turn, Ingrid dips a carved but beechwood ladle into the must, lifting a honey gold sample free of stones. She pours it gently through a coarse linen strainer into a waiting trough, the liquid flowing in a steady amber ribbon. Tiny flecks of grain settle beneath as clarity emerges. A fringe tidbit surfaces some sagas claim. Shieldmaidens sang lullabies to the mead, during racking soothing the brew's spirit into clear depth. Historians still debate whether such lullabies were sung in practice or later romantic additions. You lean in, watching light refract through falling ribbons of mead and quip. If my tears clarified problems like this, I'd brew emotions daily. That's your first gentle jest. As the trough fills, apprentices adjust its tilt, allowing sediment to collect at the lower corner. Freitas takes a shallow wooden skimmer and teases fine scum from the surface, each lifted flake, revealing brighter clarity beneath. A mainstream historical fact, surface skimming removed proteins and yeast foams that clouded mead. Historians still argue whether skimming happened only once or was repeated through multiple racking sessions. You spot a few tiny bubbles trapped in pooled scum and quip. If my distractions bubbled up like this, I'd skim my inbox daily. That's your second light jest. You help carry the clarified mead in dark, heavy hides, sealed pouches to the next turn, where it will age further. Moving slowly, you feel the mead's weight pressing into your palms, each draft a treasure of filtered sweetness. A fringe rumor drifts. Some brewmasters insisted clarified mead tasted too pure and invited mischievous spirits. They left a bit of sludge in the bottom as an offering. Historians still debate whether this arose from genuine superstition or pragmatic waste prevention. You shoulder the hide pouch and murmur, "If I had to leave a bit of dust behind as an offering, I'd never make my bed." That's your third gentle jest. In the next turn, apprentices pour the racked mead from pouches across another linen strainer. Fine weave this time, removing even smaller particles. Ingrid crouches inspecting the golden liquid's clarity, then nods in approval. A mainstream historical fact, successive filtration steps using progressively finer cloths achieved near crystal clarity. Historians still debate whether Viking brewers reserved ultra-clear mead for chieftains while families sipped more rustic batches. You know the mead's mirror finish, then quip, "If my motives reflected this clearly, I'd avoid misunderstandings." That's your fourth light jest. Once the mead rests in its final tun, Shieldmaidens seal the vessel with beeswax and pitch materials chosen for waterproofing and gentle antiseptic properties. A fringe detail surfaces some local tales claim. Shieldmaidens engrave protective runes in the wax seal to guard against spoilage, though historians still argue whether any rune-carved seals have been found or exist only in folklore. You admire the wax's glossy sheen, testing its hardness with a light tap of your fingernail. Around you the room hums with hushed satisfaction. Fermentation's rough stage. Behind clarity achieved and mead now glinting pure. You recall earlier stone-warming fire yeast's first breath and now this final filtering, a journey from wild honey to refined libation. You offer a gentle smile, thinking, "If clarity followed my thoughts this smoothly, I'd never second-guess myself." That's your fifth gentle jest. Stepping back, you feel the oxygen-rich air cool your brow as you gaze upon rows of nearly empty tuns and full, clarified mead vessels. A callback flutters. Remember the spring water's purity. Now it courses through honey's legacy, refined by ritual and tool. You breathe in the room's subdued hush and prepare to taste the first true sips, where mead's balanced character will emerge. You slip into the tasting chamber where low benches circle a rough-hewn table, stained with centuries of spilled mead and herb remnants. The air hums with a heady mix of botanicals, a fragrant overture promising depth and nuance. Shieldmaidens perch at each bench, wooden goblets in hand, eager for the first ceremonial tastings. A mainstream historical fact, Viking mead often incorporated local herbs, juniper bog, myrtle yarrow, to add complexity and purported medicinal benefits. Some saga fragments describe sacred brews, reserved for chieftains flavored with chosen botanicals. Historians still argue whether these infusions originated as health remedies or evolved mainly for flavor variation. Freydis raises her horn, filled with plain mead's first run amber clarity undisturbed. She inhales deeply, closing her eyes to catch the pure honey's aroma, sweet floral, unadorned. She tilts the rim toward her lips and sips, letting the liquid roll across her tongue before swallowing. A fringe tidbit surfaces tradition held that tasting plain mead first cleansed the palate's spirits, allowing subsequent herb flavors to shine through. Historians still debate whether this sequence emerged from genuine sensory insight or later ceremonial codification. You follow suit, tasting. The pure mead warmth unfurls in your chest, a gentle rise of sweetness echoing ancestral summers. Next, Ingrid presents a bowl of mead, steeped in crushed juniper berries, each tiny blue-black orb bursting with piney resin. You lift your goblet to the light. The liquid takes on a faint greenish tint, and a breath of forest breeze drifts your way. A mainstream fact juniper served as both flavoring and antiseptic, believed to ward off infection. Many medieval brewers prized it for preserving mead on long sea voyages. Historians still argue whether the juniper's inclusion primarily reflected practical preservation needs or cultural preference for its woodsy note. You sip thoughtfully the juniper's cool bite, contrasts honey's warmth, tingling your palate with a forest whisper. You quip quietly, "If pine needles brewed this well, I'd pine for every cup." That's your first gentle jest. A slender maid named Runa steps forward with a horn of bog myrtle mead, its surface mottled with faint green specks from crushed leaves. She holds the horn at arm's length, turning it slowly so the mead catches lamplight. You lean in, inhaling the aromatic musk, earthy, slightly peppery, with a whisper of citrus. A fringe whisper emerges. Some healers believe bog myrtle-infused mead help ease headaches and ward off evil dreams. Historians still debate whether any true medicinal compounds existed in the leaves or if the lore held more placebo than efficacy. You sip the flavor is boldly herbal, yet gentle, a grounding counterpoint to honey's sweetness. You must. If this cured my overthinking, I'd steep my thoughts overnight. That's your second light jest. Freydis places a bowl carved from ashwood on the table, mead infused with yarrow flowers and wild mint. The mead's hue deepens to a muted gold, and a faint minty breeze drifts from the bowl. You pick up a sprig of mint laid beside the bowl, brushing it across your palm to release extra oils before dropping it in. A mainstream fact yarrow with its subtle bitterness balanced sweetness and was linked to wound healing. Medieval manuscripts describe mead makers adding mint for digestive relief. Historians still argue whether yarrow's bitterness or mint's cooling power held greater appeal, or if brewers simply followed regional herb abundance. You taste, and the morsel of mint dances across your tongue, bright, uplifting. You quip, if mint brushed my breath this well, I'd never need minty gum. That's your third gentle jest. Now, Ingrid presents a speculative trial mead infused with crushed ginger root and a pinch of black pepper. The mead's color deepens toward bronze, and a warm, spicy steam billows from the horn's rim. A fringed notion surfaces some adventurous Shieldmaidens claimed ginger's heat prepared the belly for long winter feasts. Historians still debate whether ginger arrived in Viking territories early enough to feature in medieval brews, or if references are later Viking revival embellishments. You sip boldly, the first wave hits with pepper's prickle, quickly followed by ginger's sunlit heat, all underpinned by honey's smooth cradle. You smirk, if ginger cleared my sniffles this swiftly, I'd spice every season. That's your fourth light jest. A gentle hush settles as the Shieldmaidens pass around a communal horn, combining all herbs, juniper, bog myrtle, yarrow, mint, and ginger in balanced measure. You lift the horn and inhale a tapestry of flavors. Forest, marsh, meadow, and root converge in a single breath. A mainstream fact, multi-herb mead, sometimes called gruit, predates hops in Northern Europe, serving both as flavoring and mild preservatives. Historians still argue whether gruit's decline owed to the arrival of hops or shifting taste preferences. You sip with reverence, the blended brew sings across your palate, each note distinct yet harmonious. You quip softly, if collaboration tasted like this, board meetings would end in toasts. That's your fifth gentle jest. Ingrid invites reflections, you note. Juniper's crisp clarity, bog myrtle's earthy depth, mint's brightness, and ginger's warmth, each offering a distinct layer, proving mead's versatility. A fringe anecdote drifts, certain chieftains held secret spice ratios, guarded as fiercely as war plans. Historians still debate whether any documented recipes reference clan-specific formulas, or if the secrecy is legendary. You share your observation. This gruit feels like sitting in a meadow, wrapped in a wool cloak. The Shieldmaidens nod and smile, quietly but pleased, as horns empty, apprentices wipe rims and prepare for the next cask, where aging will further meld flavors. A callback emerges from water's blessing, to malts, roast yeasts, spark, to herbal layering. Now each element coalesces in tasting's sacred moment. You breathe in the lingering aroma of herbs and honey, letting the world narrow to the soft symphony of flavor. The tasting chamber's lamplight glows softly as you step away, heart warmed by ritual and taste. You murmur, if life's spice blended this well, I'd savor every moment. And with that thought, you follow Shieldmaidens toward the storeroom's cool hush, eager for mead's next revelation. You slip into the guild hall annex, an extension of the longhouse, with low benches and wooden pegs lining rough pillars, each peg holding an apron kettle or ceremonial staff. The air hums with hushed debate as Shieldmaidens and a handful of male skalds gather to discuss brewing tradition and authority. You trudge forward, heart thrumming as you sense tension, lacing the warm, honeyed aroma of maturing mead. A mainstream historical fact, in many Viking communities, women oversaw household brewing, while men, often poetic skalds or chieftain stewards, handled larger-scale production and ceremonial presentation. Historians still argue whether brewing guilds formally recognized female leadership or maintained patriarchal oversight, masked as custom. At the room's center, Ingrid perches on a low stool, her leather apron glinting under lantern light. Across from her sits Einar, the skald, ink-stained and eager, gesturing toward a scroll listing brewing quotas. His long fingers trace lines as he asserts that only male-brewed mead merits presentation at chieftain feasts. A fringe tidbit surfaces: some saga fragments claim male skalds once recited sagas over bats to inspire Mead's strength. Yet historians still debate whether these recitals truly influence flavor or simply served as performative male ritual. You watch Ingrid's steady gaze, her jaw firm, and quip under your breath, "If words brewed mead this strongly, I'd write every speech by the barrel." That's your first gentle jest. Ingrid rises slow and measured apron, swaying like a warrior's cloak. "We crafted this batch from First Light honey heather malt and sacred spring water," she states, voice soft yet resolute. "Our union of hands guided every stage. If Mead's heart is a craft, then our hands are heirs." A mainstream historical fact: women often held proprietary knowledge of Mead's secret steps, timing, stirring herbal blends that male apprentices later documented in runic records. Historians still argue whether these women received written credit or remained anonymous laborers. You feel the weight of her words, nodding in quiet solidarity. An apprentice scurries in, bearing a small horn of mead offered as a peace token. Einar accepts, sniffing its aroma before raising it toward the hall's rafters. "We do not contest your skill," he concedes, voice low. "But the chieftain's hall demands ceremony, aligned with ancestral rites led by men. A fringe notion drifts: certain Norse laws required male oversight for tribute brews, destined for religious offerings." Historians still debate whether these laws were widespread or varied by region. You watch Ingrid swallow a breath, amber mead glinting at her lips. You step closer, feeling the heart's warmth brush your back as you speak. "If Mead's purpose is unity, why split hands by gender? Each hand lifts horn, each heart sings its praise." A ripple of surprise flickers through both groups. A mainstream historical fact: some Icelandic assemblies things allowed village women to vote on brewing practices, though historians still argue whether these rights extended across the Norse world or remained unique exceptions. Your gentle challenge hangs in the air. Einar's brow furrows. He opens his mouth, then closes it, a skald's pride wrestling with the truth in your words. Ingrid moves to your side, gratitude softening the lines around her eyes. Together you represent a brewing future, where skill, not sex, guides tradition. A faint whisper emerges later: medieval guild charters in Scandinavia formally recognized female brewsters alongside men. Historians still debate whether these charters sprang from Viking precedent or from later European influences. A moment of hush follows. Then Einar clears his throat and gestures toward the scroll. "Let us amend these quotas, ensure female brewsters' names grace records equally." He smiles, humility warming his tone. A triumphant murmur courses through the hall. Unity forged in debate. You quip to Ingrid: "If debates brewed this sweet, I'd argue nightly." That's your second gentle jest. Applause claps, soft as falling petals, echoes off oak beams. Candlelight flickers in celebration as the guild accepts new roles, women and men as equal custodians of Mead's sacred craft. A mainstream historical fact: egalitarian brewing laws appear in 11th century Icelandic codes. Some scholars argue whether these stem from earlier Norse practice or respond to Christian egalitarian ideals. You reflect on how tonight's victory aligns with those ancient laws, a living thread connecting past and present. Einar stands and raises his horn in a toast. "To Ingrid, to all women brewers, and to the unity of hands that craft our sweet legacy." The hall answers in chorus horns, clinking a crystalline note, resonating like a shared heartbeat. You lift your own horn, ringing clear beneath vaulted timbers. A callback surfaces: remember the rune-inscribed ladles and honey jars blessed at dawn. Now their originators stand, recognized side by side with skalds in ceremonial feasts. You savor that moment, mead's warmth blossoming in your chest like a quiet victory. You quip softly, "If recognition tasted this good, I'd bake it into every toast." That's your third gentle jest. As laughter and song fold into the night, you step back, content to witness brewing traditions reshaped by unity. You breathe in the hall's honeyed echo, knowing tomorrow's mead will carry both women's and men's names in equal measure, history's sweetness distilled in each horn. You follow a narrow corridor to the storeroom, where cool stone walls cradle rows of oak staves bound into barrels and long earthenware jars sealed with wax. The air here is hushed, thick with the gentle reverberation of aging mead settling into mellow harmony. A mainstream historical fact: Viking age mead, often aged for months in cool cellars, carved beneath longhouses or natural caves, allowing flavors to mellow and clarify. Historians still debate whether these cellars reached consistent temperatures year-round or varied with seasons. Ingrid kneels to inspect a small barrel, tapping its side with a wooden mallet. A muted thud echoes, denoting fullness and readiness. She wipes condensation from the stave's rim, revealing faint runic marks noting the date of racking and expected maturity. A fringe tidbit surfaces: some brewers rumor to add a sprig of rowan wood to the bung, believing its protective spirit warded off spoilage. Historians still argue whether any botanicals actually adorn barrels, or if tales emerged from later folklore. You lean in, smelling faint cedar and honey notes, and quip: "If rowan could guard my leftovers this well, I'd hang talismans in my fridge." That's your first gentle jest. Fridas approaches a larger jar sealed in pitch, and beeswax tracing carved notches indicating first blend mead, destined for feast days. She pries the wax seal just enough to slide a small tasting pipette in, preserving most of the seal's integrity. A mainstream historical fact: wax seals kept oxygen out, preserving flavor and preventing vinegar spoilage. Historians still debate whether seals were renewed regularly or left intact until final use. You sample a drop rich smooth with a whisper of oak tannin and smile, thinking, "If seals tasted this good, I'd never open my letters." That's your second light jest. Along one wall, apprentices fan small barrels to encourage gentle evaporation and concentration. The room's slight breeze carries sweet aged aromas. A mainstream fact: angels share the mead, lost to evaporation, concentrated the remaining brew. Historians still argue whether Viking brewers intentionally encouraged evaporation for potent results or lamented the lost volume. You admire the barrel's wood grain and quip: "If evaporation focused my ideas this well, I'd leave windows open." That's your third gentle jest. You spot a ledger etched on a wooden tablet, dates of bottling year cycles, and notes on subtle flavor shifts. Ingrid translates Harvest 1023 honey, sourced from Golden Heather yields floral finish. Harvest 1022 malt forward with smoke undertones. A mainstream historical fact: some monastic scriptoria recorded brew logs, though few Norse records survive. Historians still debate whether any baking brewers kept formal ledgers or relied solely on oral memory. You trace runes with your finger, feeling the weight of recorded heritage. Below, a low shelf holds small wooden kegs, labeled for home distribution, clearly marked for Shieldmaidens families, and those unable to attend feasts. These kegs promise mead for heart to hearth, strengthening communal bonds. A fringe notion emerges: legends say Shieldmaidens gifted kegs to traveling skalds to spread tales of brewing prowess. Historians still debate whether such portable tokens existed or remain genre clichés. You pick up a small keg, feeling its reassuring heft, and quip: If every gift came with barley inside, I'd never need a birthday list. That's your fourth gentle jest. Finally, Fridays operates a stone wine presser, repurposed for mead, gently pressing soaked oak chips into a barrel to impart deeper tannins. The slow squeeze releases a dark amber stream as apprentices catch it in a bowl. A mainstream fact: oak chips or staves added during aging enriched flavor and color. Historians still argue whether Norse brewers used natural barrel wood alone or actively supplemented oak for complexity. You taste the fresh press, earthy, robust, with soft vanilla warmth and think, if oak chips soften my attitude this quickly, I'd chew them like gum. That's your fifth gentle jest. The storeroom's hush settles as barrels and jars rest in cool darkness, each vessel a chapter in Mead's evolving story. You feel time enfold you, months of slumber, slow transformation and patient waiting condensed into quiet barrels. A callback glimmers remember dawn's first honey harvest. Now that honey waits in amber slumber, destined to awaken in festive horns. You step back into the corridor's dim light anticipation, humming for Mead's final presentation. You step into the grand hall where long benches flank a central stone table laid for the feast. Shields hang overhead as silent sentinels and tallow candles flicker in wrought iron sconces, casting lively shadows on carved oak. Shieldmaidens stand at the table's head, each horn and cup filled with amber mead that glints like a captured sunrise. A mainstream historical fact: Viking feasts often featured mead, poured into drinking horns with communal toasts marking battles won and alliances forged. Historians still argue whether each guest received equal shares or social rank determined pour size. Ingrid raises her carved horn, its tip engraved with runes of victory, and calls out the feast's opening. To our ancestors whose courage guides us, to this mead whose sweetness unites us, a fringe tidbit surfaces some skaldic poems describe mead toasts performed in strict metrical form, each syllable offering rhythmic honor. Historians still debate whether metered toasts persisted in practice or appear only in later poetic reconstructions. You lift your horn, feeling the communal pulse. As every cup clinks in unison, a crystalline chord resonating through the hall. You quip, if cheers rang this harmoniously in meetings, I'd never fear the boardroom. That's your first gentle jest. Fridays steps forward to pour the first communal bowl, an ornate vessel carved from walrus ivory. Before passing it along carved oak trusses, each shield maiden dips a ladle offering draughts to honored guests, a chieftain visiting jarls, and an elder skald whose graying beard quivers with anticipation. A mainstream historical fact: communal bowls signified shared trust and unity, guests drinking from a common source before individual horns. Historians still argue whether this practice risked health or strengthened bonds through shared ritual. You watch faces light as mead flows, then murmur, if unity tasted this sweet, I'd share dessert with everyone. That's your second light jest. At one corner, apprentices walk trays of herb-infused mead bowls, rimmed with crushed bog myrtle and mint, offering gentle variety to those seeking subtle herbal whispers. A fringe notion drifts. Certain healers claimed sipping mint mead eased battle-weary hearts, though scholars still debate whether any therapeutic effect surpasses placebo. You taste a spoonful cool mint, swirling through honey's warmth and grin, thinking, if mead cured jet lag this neatly, I'd book red-eye flights nightly. That's your third gentle jest. Across the table, a jarl's daughter raises her cup, noting the oak-aged mead's subtle vanilla note. She toasts Ingrid by name, praising her wisdom steeped in oak. A mainstream fact: oak aging imparted vanillin and tannins adding complexity prized among elites. Historians still argue whether aging times varied by region or followed strict seasonal cycles. Ingrid inclines her head modestly, eyes bright as candlelight reflects in the mead's depths. Now the elder skald stands voice deep and recites a brief saga ode, celebrating mead's journey from heather to hearthstone, to tune yeast's awakening to feast's blessing. His words roll like distant thunder, rich imagery, invoking bees, runestones, and ancestral halls. A fringe detail emerges. Some chroniclers note that skalds improvised lines mid-ode to honor recent deeds, though historians still debate whether any brew-specific verses survive beyond literary fragments. You feel the saga's cadence stir your pulse and quip, "If poetry flavored my breakfast, I'd write odes to my oatmeal." That's your fourth gentle jest. As the skald finishes, Ingrid signals for horn-bearers to kneel, offering horns to each household's eldest member, a gesture of respect and lineage continuity. The hall bows in collective acknowledgement, each horn passed with reverent care. A mainstream historical fact, passing horns to ancestors' descendants symbolized lineage blessings. Historians still argue whether horn succession followed strict primogeniture or varied by local custom. You clasp your horn, feeling history's weight as you lift it in silent gratitude. A soft murmur spreads as mead's warmth and ceremony melt into laughter and conversation. Guests lean forward to exchange tales, ideas, and flirtations, mead's gentle buzz, smoothing social edges. You recall earlier stages, honey harvest, ritual water-heated stones, now apexed in this feast day presentation. A callback glimmers from cliffside honey to communal bowl, each step converged in this hall's celebratory chorus. You take one final sip of oak-aged mead, its tannins mellow and honey notes glowing. A gentle thought drifts: if every proud moment began with shared mead, life's triumphs would taste sweeter. With that, you rise to join the hall's hum feast underway, mead flowing and tradition carried forward in each shimmering horn. You step outside the longhouse into the crisp morning air, the lingering scent of oak and honey drifting behind you as you gaze upon fields now tamed by modern hands. Solar panels gleam atop a nearby barn, and stainless steel tanks hum with cooling fans. A stark contrast to ancient tuns, but you sense the same devotion pulsing through this revived meadery. A mainstream historical fact, today's craft mead renaissance draws heavily on Viking techniques. Small batches honey sourcing and wood aging celebrated at festivals across Scandinavia. Historians still argue whether modern interpretations adhere faithfully to medieval recipes or blend global influences. Ingrid, no longer clad in chainmail, but in denim apron, and Freydis sporting safety goggles, lead you through gleaming fermentation halls. They hold metal pails of wildflower honey from local apiaries that trace bee lineages back centuries. A fringe tidbit surfaces: some modern beekeepers claim to maintain Norse bee stock, selecting for traits reminiscent of wild Scandinavian bees thought extinct. Historians still debate whether any lineage links truly survive or if marketing myth fuels the claim. You inhale the honey's familiar fragrance, rich floral redolent of heather moors, and quip, "If my grocery store stocked ancient bees, I'd shop by lineage." That's your first gentle jest. You approach rows of stainless steel fermenters, each temperature controlled and fitted with digital monitors. Yet beside them stands a single handcrafted oak tun. As a respectful nod to tradition, Ingrid taps a control panel to adjust the yeast pitch temperature, then taps the oak barrel's stave, merging old and new. A mainstream fact combining ancient vessels with modern equipment optimizes flavor profiles while ensuring consistency. Historians still debate whether true authenticity requires relic methods or embraces technological progress. You watch bubbles glisten in the oak ton's spigot, then quip, "If software could infuse soul like oak, I'd code in cooperage." That's your second light jest. Freitas introduces you to the experimental Saga series, small batch meads, brimming with foraged herbs and heirloom grains. One barrel holds heather and spruce tips. Another, hum with lincolnberry and birch sap. A mainstream fact craft meaderies often launch experimental lines inspired by historical sources fueling consumer interest. Historians still argue whether innovation stays tethered to tradition or pushes boundaries too far. You taste a spoonful of spruce tip mead, bright resinous with honey's sweet thread, and smile, thinking, "If experiments energized me like this, I'd invent daily." That's your third gentle jest. Across the room, a digital display projects ancient rune inscriptions alongside modern tasting notes, a pairing of tradition and tech. Patrons can swipe tablets to learn about brewing ratios and rune lore. A fringe notion drifts. Some craft mead labels feature QR codes, linking to virtual runic chanting sessions. Historians still debate whether digital rituals hold any charm or remain a novelty. You scan the code, hear a hushed chant, and joke. "If chants became my wake-up call, I'd moonlight as a midnight DJ." That's your fourth light jest. In a side alcove, homebrew enthusiasts gather around refitted Viking gear, a replica brewing kit, inviting hands-on trials. Ingrid coaches a young brewer on using a paddle to stir must in a half-size oak barrel, its heft mimicking ancestral labor. A mainstream historical fact, homebrewing kits modeled after Viking equipment spark interest in traditional methods. Historians still argue how accurately such kits reflect original designs versus stylized interpretations. You have the paddle feeling solidarity with Shieldmaidens of Olden Muse. "If chores felt this historic, I'd never need a museum pass." That's your fifth gentle jest. As tours conclude, you step into the mead hall, long communal tables, where visitors sample flights of mead under vaulted glass ceilings. Laughter and clinking glasses echo a modern feast, echoing ancient camaraderie. You recall that grand feast horns raised oaths, recited feeling present-day echoes in every sip. Callback glimmers from cliffside honey to tasting chambers blend. Now global palates reflect the Viking spirit in each glass. You lift a frosted tulip glass, brimming with seasonal mead, rosehip infused, and gently sparkling, and inhale its aroma, rose petals entwined with honey's warmth. You taste, closing your eyes as flavors bloom. A final thought drifts. "If every revival tasted this rich, I'd never forget the past." You quip softly, "If tomorrow's leaders championed mead diplomacy, world peace might be distilled nightly." With that, you savor the moment history's legacy is alive in modern revival. You return to the longhouse courtyard at dusk, lantern glow spilling across stone and timber, as apprentices wheel in barrels of newly aged mead. The night air carries warmth and honeyed promise. And you sense the final act of this brewing saga drawing near. A mainstream historical fact. Viking harvest festivals often culminated in toasts of aged mead at the autumn equinox, celebrating bounty before winter's hush. Historians still debate whether specific dates align with solar cycles or varied by local custom. Ingrid stands beneath the central canopy of shields, donning ceremonial garb, a wreath of heather at her brow, and a cloak embroidered with barley motifs. Freitas at her side holds the horn of oak-aged mead, destined for the evening's finale. You trudge forward, heart-thrumming as you prepare to taste the culmination of months-long labor. Ingrid lifts her horn high, to beginnings born in dawn's light, to hands that forge sweetness from grit and grace, and to the mead that carries our legacy, Skal. A hush falls before a rush of horns, clinking a symphony of true unity. A fringe tidbit surfaces. Some accounts say the first sip of festival mead was poured onto ancestral stones as a libation, though historians still argue whether any ritual altar survived or appear only in sagas. You raise your horn and taste the oak-aged blend, smooth warm, layered with honey malt herbs, and the faintest smoke. Each sip unfolds like a story. Cliffside, honey drips, spring water, ripples, heated stones, cradle warmth and herbs whisper in twilight. A mainstream fact, well-aged mead, mellows tannins and ferments, complex esters yielding flavors, prized across centuries. Historians still debate whether Viking palates preferred drier or sweeter profiles. You quip softly, "If sorrow melted like this honeyed warmth, I'd taste joy nightly." That's your first gentle jest. Freydis offers you a second horn, a gruit blend of juniper and yarrow aged side by side. Its herbal resonance rings brighter a counterpart to oak's depth. You sip, savoring the meadowsweet's echo and the forest's cool embrace. A fringe notion drifts. A few crumbled runic records mention mead of three worlds, earth, sea. Sky crafted only once a generation. Historians still debate whether these ever existed beyond poetic metaphor. As you finish, Ingrid circulates small cups of celebratory spiced mead warm with cinnamon and clove. You feel the spices glow spread from throat to chest, a final flourish. A mainstream historical fact, spiced mead's precursors to mulled beverages featured in winter festivals to chase away chill. Historians still argue whether Viking spicing influenced medieval European wassail traditions. You must, "If spices ignited my spirit like this, I'd deck my halls with cloves." That's your second light jest. Gathered under shields and starlight, the community shares laughter, stories, and songs. A skald leads a closing chant, weaving the mead's journey into a woven saga, each verse a drop in the mead's vast river. A callback emerges from honey's wild harvest. To modern revival, tonight's celebration honors every stage of creation. You take one last taste, letting mead's warmth settle in your bones. A gentle thought drifts: if every ending carried this sweetness, goodbyes would feel like homecomings. You quip to Ingrid, "If farewells tasted this sweet, I'd never say goodbye." That's your third gentle jest. The lantern's glow softens, and you step back into the longhouse's glow content. That Viking Shieldmaidens dawn-brewed mead lives on in hearts and horns across time. The evening's warmth drifts through your senses as lantern light softens around you. Allow your shoulders to relax, feeling the grainy floor beneath your back and the faint tap of distant laughter. Picture verse and horn, ancient chants fading like sunlit ripples on still water. Breathe gently, drawing in the sweet scent of honey and oak, and exhale all tension into the night's calm embrace. Recall the flight of early morning smoke as it curled through cliffside hives, the hush of spring water in forest groves, and the crackle of heated stones coaxing life into the golden must. Let each memory dissolve into a soothing ember glow, warming you from within. Your breath echoes the tone's slow bubbles, steady, rhythmic, and easy, guiding you toward the dream's gentle shores. Imagine candle flames dancing on shield-studded walls, their soft flicker lulling you into peace. Envision seasoned barrels resting in cool cellars, each heartbeat echoing yeast's silent alchemy. Feel gratitude for each stage, dew-drenched honey-whispered runes, stirring paddles, herbal infusions, and communal toasts that wove hearts together across ages. Let your thoughts trail. The final sip of oak-aged mead, its warmth, still rippling through your chest. Let the memory of laughter under starlit shields drift like petals on calm water. In this quiet twilight, hold the Shieldmaidens' unity in your mind, a circle bound by ritual flavor and shared purpose. As your eyelids flutter toward rest, breathe slowly. Inhale peace, exhale release. Let the longhouse's heart hum a lullaby of timber and honey, wrapping you in gentle mercy. Sleep now, cradled by mead's legacy, where ancient echoes cradle you and every dream carries the promise of dawn's next soft light.